Eric.
Omar.
What's cracking, guys? Omar Isuf here, back with another Iron Culture episode. Sorry, I had to do that, Eric, just because now you're back on my YouTube channel. It feels so damn good. I implore everyone to check out the video real quick with Eric, where the hunk himself talks about broscience versus science and how it's not really, a battle between the two. But I want to give Eric a shout out because I think you did a phenomenal job. And it just feels so good, Eric. It's been I took my 3-year sabbatical from YouTube, but it's been a while since you've been properly on the channel. So I do want to give that shout out to that video before we begin.
We're back.
Yeah, we are so back.
So back. And it feels good. No. I the first time I got to be on your channel was a privilege, a pleasure, an honor. And there was a little stint there where you'd hit me up in the DMs and be like, "Yo, Eric, we need a video on protein." And I'm like, "I got you." And those are the good old days. And the best of those good old days was when I was actually physically in Toronto. And so being able to meet up in Texas and do it. And I love the internet, man. I tell you what, I get both, "Oh my God, you look like Chris Evans," huge compliment. And then Eric looks sickly. His neck is so small. He's clearly held himself back. And then in the same video, man, he's really optimized and played every hand he's dealt. So I am a huge, small, non-self-optimized, optimized natural bodybuilder from what I've learned from the YouTube comments. So lots of good feedback for me to calibrate. And but more importantly, but in more seriousness, no, it was a really good topic. And I think we're in a weird space right now where people can cultivate individual silos, but relatively large silos, rapidly, with how quickly you can grow on TikTok, and you can create these bubbles of perception on how things operate. And one of those that I've noticed is there is this kind of anti-intellectualism that is giving some pushback against the kind of the scientific approach to bodybuilding. And this goes in cycles. And it is absolutely not just like the other guy's fault. I think there are many people on the scientific side of the community, I guess, people who lean more heavily on research-based findings, who sometimes don't fully grasp what it is to be evidence-based. And I also think some of the early-stage converts, because in my experience, there's basically two types of people who come to really science-heavy content, or even not that science-heavy, but just like people who are that's part of the equation. It's those who get chewed up and spit out by the very transient, marketing-heavy, predatory fitness industry, and they're trying to find something that has some element of truth and trustworthiness. They land on something that seems to be a little more based upon just a cult of personality. Or it's people who kind of already have a disposition towards that. They're a little more analytical minded. If they talk to their career guidance counselor in high school, like, you should be an engineer, that type of kind of person. A little more risk averse, a little more conservative, a little more naturally skeptical. And those people come to kind of evidence-based practice or scientific-based content. And I think initially, sometimes, especially if they got chewed up and spit out by the kind of at-large fitness industry, they kind of just replace the gurus and the cult of personality figures they had with, okay, science is 10 commandments. And they end up putting science in a box that is wholly unscientific. And it doesn't actually align with the underlying philosophy of what it means to be skeptical, have shifting opinions, and to base your opinions on data, and to observe and pay attention, and to also understand that there are individual differences and the limitations of science and how it actually plays into evidence-based practice, which includes personal preferences, individual differences, as well as experience. So it's a tough one to tackle because, in that video, you can see that some of the people who gave pushback against me, Omar, they weren't even giving pushback against anything I said. And it's almost like they didn't listen to it. They're giving pushback against the avatar of what they feel I represent, which is a overemphasis, encroachment of science, elitism, and ignoring what people have learned in the trenches and what has worked for a century, So it's actually hard to take their comments Not that I don't take them seriously, because I think it's a serious way that they feel about where the space has gone. But it's hard to feel like I have any ownership over that as someone who's been playing the role of the person who's like, hey, science guys, like pay attention to experience. Like that's 90% of the content we have when we talk about science on the 3DMJ podcast, right? For anyone who listens to that, but which is not that many people. So it's a funny thing to observe, and I think it's good that you're coming back to us, Omar, because the Sons of Batman, as you have put them, are not doing the job of keeping Gotham on the right track. And with you back, my friend, and also our supporting cast of people who know exactly about evidence-based practice, welcome back after, 3 or 4 years, I want to say 2018 in Singapore. 4 years.
We
have probably, I would actually say probably one of the most lauded and excellent track record coaches in bodybuilding, at least in natural bodybuilding. Not that you only work with folks on our side of the fence, but if you look at the resume, Cliff Wilson, he's back. The man, talk about the trenches. He can't get out. They're too deep. He's been in there too long. He couldn't if he wanted to. The ladders are not long enough. He climbs to the top. He's got another 10 feet of trench. The guy's got so much practical experience, yet I think he would, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. Cliff, first, welcome back. Second question for you to kick things off. Would you consider yourself an evidence-based practitioner?
I do. You know, like it's funny, like you said, I think sometimes I get perceived to be one thing or another. You know, I don't have the formal education, so sometimes I get perceived to be, you know, a little bro-y. But then when people hear me start quoting a study here or there, then according to other people, I'm, you know, too sciencey and a bit of a nerd. So I guess it's whatever box you want to put me in. But I am evidence-based, you know, and like you said, I enjoy science, even though I appreciate science, even though I don't have the formal education, and it's a useful tool in what we have. And like you said, though, but it's not like a religion to follow blindly. At least not science, but the research that's currently out there, because there's always new research, right?
Hey, Eric, can I just say, Cliff, it feels so good, my man, to have you back on. And it's a perfect kind of dovetail to what we're, speaking about, Eric, earlier. Perception is very important. And Cliff, besides, yes, your accomplishments, your numerous clients have gotten tremendous results, your reputation in the space, your line of thinking that you put on display when you make posts and so on and so forth. You know how I solely evaluate you and think to myself, damn, he must be a good coach. Do you know what my one metric is, Cliff?
I'm curious.
He's got the polo on. When you got a coach, folks, that wears a polo, like Eric, the very first thing I saw, I didn't listen to anything Eric was saying. I'm like, that's a polo right there. And I knew from the word jump, this man was right for the job. This could be 2 for 2. I could be wrong, but last time I think my man had a polo too.
Did I? I think I had a polo on because of our speaking engagement. Man, you keep catching me on polo. I never wear polos when I'm taking my daughter out to eat for her last night before she starts school tomorrow. And I'm like, I will wear a nicer shirt for her. So you catch me on like my 2 polo days in 4 years, really.
No, Cliff, that part is a joke, but it is seriously great to have you back on the podcast. And I do think it's a perfect, though, Eric, to what you're saying before, launching off point where people, I think, respect in general within any space, people who, quote unquote, do the damn thing, right? That are in the trenches, who are working with clients, who are getting then results, because a lot of people, they would say they're results oriented, where it's like, okay, we could talk about this theoretical side, but what about the application? Like, let me see, therefore, your results. And, sometimes, sure, people can therefore then misattribute. They're like, oh, you got to do A, B, C, D because of, and then the explanation might not pan out. But nonetheless, their primacy is always placed upon the results. And there is a skill and an art to coaching, and that's not the purview of this episode, but I just want to give Cliff you respect and all the people that are actual coaches in the trenches working one-on-one with people. Either Eric and myself have that background of being former personal trainers, which I think there's numerous qualities that you can gain from that profession, or working online with coaches like game day, peak week, and then for the whole prep. It's something that's underrated, I personally believe, in many different pockets of the fitness space, either to the people that are now primarily content producers or to people then that are adhering just to what the latest meta-analysis is. So there's nothing but respect for you for synthesizing everything, trying to attempt to bring it all together, man, and most importantly, doing the damn thing. So it feels great to have you back on. Polo or no polo?
I appreciate it. And it also feels good to not be huddled in a small room in Singapore at 3 a.m. with it this time.
You mean cozied up, comfortable next to your bestie, Eric Helms, in a small room that you loved. And that's the way I'm going to interpret that. No, that was actually a fun night, because I can't remember if I did it with Lauren the next day and you and Berto in a row. But anyway, we were taking advantage of the Iron Culture in-person opportunities there, as I often do when I travel. I'm like, you're on the podcast. Why? Because I'm near you. And Omar's like, wait, what time do I have to get up? Like, don't worry about it. So, no, it was a really good conversation. And I think that was a great experience when we went to Singapore, because we got to have some of those candid conversations where neither one of us had to look at, well, what do they put out on the internet for me to then intuit how do they operate? We got to just discuss things, and it was really cool to see how much overlap there was, and also different perspectives and ways of seeing things. Like just the concept of a load look was something that, and I'll explain what that is in a second. It was something I hadn't put words to, and once you had actually described it and you created kind of a schema to understand it, it became something that immediately made me a better coach, because I could better identify why and what was happening, and not necessarily like on a mechanistic explanation, but I think it hints at a key piece of you as an evidence-based practitioner that makes you effective is you're able to make observations and you focus on what works and how things change, rather than needing to understand why behind something in all cases. You're comfortable with having an idea of why, but also just knowing when I do X, Y happens. So that Y is more important than the actual WHY. So yeah, that was one of the many things that clued me in. I'm like, oh, this guy's got a good eye for detail, you know?
Yeah, the way I approach it, and I think the thing that has gone a little awry with both sides just go too far with everything, and there's this bro side that's like, don't think about it, just do it. You know what I mean? And then, for my take and how I approach everything is that what happens in real life, okay, if you're coaching people or if you're coaching yourself, right, you're making decisions. And in my opinion, the people that are most effective at making those real life decisions tend to be people that are looking for informed choices, right? What are my options? You're never going to be right 100% of the time, but you're looking to have the most informed choice. You kind of take what you've been observing in real life, what you know about the person or yourself, all of your experiences throughout life, every bit of research you've ever read in your entire life, and then you make your best judgment. And I guess sometimes when I ask people that will really quote certain bits of research to me, I'll say, like, are you looking for information or are you looking for permission? Because I think that they won't use something unless they're looking for permission to do some protocol. And if it's not in the research, then they don't feel they have that permission.
That is so perfect, Cliff. And we were actually talking about that in far less succinct, concise, and pointed words is what I was saying. And you just said it better with one perfect word: permission versus information. That is exactly what I think the people who, for whatever has resulted in this anti-intellectualism kind of movement that's pushed back against science, I think if there, takes two to tango, and if we decide that this them versus us thing is real and we want to buy into it just for the purpose of this conversation, because I actually don't think that most people sit on either extreme. If we want to say, okay, who is at fault for this conflict existing? For the fault that exists on the side of people who are more science-based, I think that's it. It's the type of person who will say, what you're doing doesn't align with the meta-analyses, and I'm uncomfortable with my reality with you making gains and not having done it. So either you're on gear and you're a fake natty, or you're on gear and I can dismiss everything you said, or you have crazy genetics, BBC, something, but I have to not have this be real to where the things that I have constructed that let me act without enough fear to prevent me from acting and pursuing a pathway and feeling comfortable leaving the front door and going to the gym and training, you're not in alignment with that. And now my reality is a little bit frayed at the edges. And I think that is something that exactly it's when people are, and sometimes it's not the industry's fault. Like they've been burned by all this other content. They've made terrible gains. They followed rough diets. They've had an eating disorder because of things. They've taken tainted supplements. I mean, there's 100 horror stories out there. You don't need to look very far in the fitness industry. So then being able to have this kind of oasis in a wasteland where you go, okay, listen, this is peer-reviewed academic research. It's on 600 people and like 2 meta-analyses. Like, okay, I'm going to do 10 sets. You know, it's like, but it's obviously like it is a fear-based thing, and I think you're 100% right that some people are exactly doing that. They're looking for permission.
And on the other end of the spectrum, I think that the opposite thing is also fear-based, right? And don't think about it, just do it crowd, because it's my interpretation of working with a lot of people over years is that they tend to fall on one side, one extreme or the other. They got to that point because of something fear-based. A lot of times these people are like, don't think about it, just do it. They maybe a lot of times life is extraordinarily complicated and they want fitness, this thing that they love, to be very uncomplicated, right? It doesn't matter. I don't have to think about this. I don't have to think about it. I just want to do blind effort. You know what I mean? I'll just eat my clean foods and I'll just, train hard. It doesn't matter what I do. And it's like a fear of being able to not interpret this complicated thing, right? And so it's like, I think it's fear-based on both ends. It's just whatever personality type is driven to those extremes. And as you said, also fear-based too is like just the idea that maybe they won't be able to understand some of the nuance that comes with it. And I feel like I'm kind of like you. I'm always like trying to like invite everybody to the center, so like in my opinion, I mean, not only the most progress, but a lot of the beauty of the sport and building muscle really lies in those gray areas and finding what works for you as an individual. I mean, it's the part I enjoy the most. I mean, you can't get me away from it, like you said.
100%. And, Omar, I think actually, so I 100% agree with you, Cliff. And I think there's even a little more color to provide on the other side and the fear that comes in there. And I think some of it is a threat to the ego, Omar. We talked about this, and it is a threat to one's worldview as well. I mean, think about it. Like, let's say you're a highly successful lifter, whether you're a power lifter, a bodybuilder, or even a coach of them who has had a lot of success, and you live in a relatively uncomplicated worldview because of that. I try these things. I have modeled the success of others who are also pros or prior Olympias or prior world champions. I do that with my clients. They get success. So I attribute my success to the decisions I've made. I'm bigger than everyone else. I'm stronger than everyone else. I've been in the space for a long time. And now, hold on, there's this person saying things that are outside of my experience, and they're also invalidating the metrics that I use to decide who is right. So it's no longer who is most successful or the biggest or who is the most prolific coach. You're telling me that they could be getting that just because of genetics or just because of maybe some drug use protocol. And it's not the training they're doing, or just because they have a good personality in a large social media space. So they're seeing survivorship bias, or they're creating a lot of people who already have a positive placebo come to them and they're seeing success and they're kind of missing the forest for the trees. Like, that's a scary reality to live in, to say like, wait, no, like I have a resume. How dare you? And I think, and I understand it. And I don't think they're necessarily aware of that when that is what's kind of triggering those types of responses. But I do think that happens a lot, and it does explain that whole, like, stop thinking about it. Like, you thinking about this is a threat to my reality, because what are we going to go down this rabbit hole where all of a sudden small people who are smart are the ones leading the charge? Oh my God. Like it's kind of, it's a funny thing, but like obviously both fears are not true, right?
Yeah. And I don't need to go too far off subject here, but I think that there's like a useful identity that you can kind of develop in that, because I'm not somebody who's ever terribly like waited for permission, but I've also I consider myself a highly analytical individual. So, I guess, I've always just kind of trying to develop a useful ego. I guess, I've changed my mind about a lot of things over the years, and sometimes they'll be like, "Oh, it's so shows a lot of humility the way you'll change your mind." And I'm honest with myself. I have an ego. I think, as most of us do. But I'm like, I want to be right so badly. As soon as I get enough evidence that I'm wrong, I'll switch to the winning team immediately. Like, you know what I mean? Like, my ego is like, I'm going to join these guys because it looks like it's a little better over here. You know what I mean? It's like, I feel like you can kind of if you have an ego, just put it to use for you. You know what I mean? Let it serve you, because I mean, I don't know. It would hurt my ego terribly to continue being wrong for years on end rather than just switching to something that is clearly more effective. And I guess sometimes, even when I was first starting coaching, I remember a lot of these old school bodybuilders usually like, I've been doing it this way for 20 years, or I've been doing things this exact way for 20 years, and I've been doing fine. I'm thinking to myself, you haven't changed anything in 20 years. Like, in 20 years, you've never stopped and been like, man, maybe there's a few things I could be doing better here. And I was just thought, I hope I'm never that.
Cliff, can I just say so? Boys, I think we just have to say this out loud, the secret right here. I think lifting for a lot of people is the unspoken therapy that they're seeking, because as we know, like actual therapy, that's a sign of weakness. What the hell is that? It costs money. It's like the iron is going to teach me all my secrets. It's like a sacred part of yourself that you're giving, to your point, Cliff, when you say you turn off either the brain, or Eric, the most probably one of the potentially scariest aspects is like Fahrenheit, 451 of it's almost close to the burning of the books, where it's like, stop there, like don't think, like don't question the worldview. Well, I think I would say this space, and I'm curious at your thoughts, Cliff, on this. It's sad and it's disappointing in ways how gullible people can be, where I think everyone is desiring the secret, because I think people feel that there's something inherently they need to fix. And so it's almost like, that's why I gave the analogy, sort of like therapy, where like there's something within you that this is not always the case at all by any extreme. But the idea that you're seeking there's a problem and there's a solution that you're after. And in lifting, it's whatever the case might be, either you want to improve something, doesn't really matter, that you're desiring an improvement of some sort, and we're willing to believe, as long as the person, and I think that's why, Eric, to the point, in other spaces, you wouldn't simply have this person that seems like either A, they have the best results, or whatever the case might be, or maybe they're talking the best game, where we'll fall such easy prey to these emotional responses. I think it's probably higher than any other space. I understand why it happens, but I'll use a quick example, Cliff. I don't know if you saw it, but it was almost like insane to see with turkesterone as an example. So we know like this thing does not do anything, right? Like we could say that, or like let's just say we say the neutral, like that neutral does nothing. Principle charity, maybe like extremely small positive, whatever. But the disproportionate response, Cliff, I wish like someone. So I wish we had our boy Connor Heffernan, people just taking screenshots, documenting all these things. There's thousands of comments on YouTube videos of people genuinely believing they're getting better results than they ever have before. And so when you have this plethora of anonymous anecdotes always in the space, I think I could see why people get swayed so easily. And I'm wondering for yourself, this is the question, as someone who identifies and is an evidence-based coach, like what is your methodology in terms of communicating with clients, where like, so they have this goal and they have these impulses towards these goals, where either they want to believe it or they really want it so bad that they're willing to put in the work. They need to be doing these things. These things probably don't sound sexy. They don't sound lucrative. Like, what does that look like to you then to synthesize what what they should be doing and what they want to hear? Because I think that's kind of like the missing part of the argument just in general. It's like how to take what Cliff Wilson as a top tier coach knows they need to do, what they think they need to do, and get them to do it, and then get them to believe in it, right?
Honestly, this is probably the area that I had the hardest learning curve for. When I first started coaching, I noticed like half of my clients were getting lights out results and the other half were failing miserably. And I couldn't really figure out why, what was the deal here? Like, why could I get some people to follow it and some people not? People that were just following, easy victories. You know what I mean? And I was really bad at understanding what people needed to hear. And actually that's kind of what led me down to the brushing up on psychology quite a bit. I think that first off, like I try to like determine what type of person I'm speaking to. Like what does bodybuilding and training do for them? And what are their opinions? Like how sacred are their opinions to them? And then the other thing is that I think that it's been a frustrating part of my career as a coach because I think people are not great at discerning, and I don't think this is relegated just to fitness, what is valuable and what is not valuable. What real value looks like. One of the biggest critiques I get about the book that I wrote with Pete Fitchin was that we spent too much time on determining rate of loss and calculating how long your contest prep should be. In my opinion, it's the number one thing people get wrong. They rush it. They don't give themselves enough time. Last time I did the math, when people apply to work with me, I ask them, what show are you aiming for? Last time I did the math, usually around 93 to 97% of people have chosen a show that's too soon. And it's too soon enough to where no matter what changes I make, I can make perfect diet changes. We're going to fail. There's not enough time, right? And we spent a good few 3, 4, 5 pages discussing how you calculate this, how you set the tone, set the pace. And the biggest critique is you spent too much time on that. And I'm like, no, like I should have done 10 pages to get it across to people how valuable this is. It's the most valuable thing, in my opinion. And so I found like some people need, I always usually like to start with gentle nudges. What I mean by that is if I mention it in every single email, I start to get across the point of how valuable this is, how important it is to me. And when they have things that are they believe are valuable, that are not, I don't usually just shut them down, but I do like steering away from it, showing them that, hey, I hear what you're saying. I don't think it's as important as you think it is, but we'll kind of keep an eye on it, type stuff. And so it's a subtle act of improving in their mind the value of what I'm trying to get them to understand. It's sort of devaluing these unimportant or harmful practices that they're focused on. Over the course of time, though, if they don't really get that, then I kind of just say like, hey, I think it's time for you to stop focusing on this and start focusing on that. And it's like a progression model that I'll follow. It's like, then I'll kind of do a hard stop. Like, this is starting to hold us back. And then if they really don't get it, then I'll do like, sometimes what I'll call like a Hail Mary is like, I'll say, listen, I let them know because I think at this point I've proven to people I care about results. You know what I mean? Like I want results, and I'll just kind of tell them like, listen, I don't think I'm the coach for you because I don't think you're doing the things that you need to do to meet your stated goals. And in my experience, if I had to take a stab at the percentage, 80% of the time it's a wake up call for people, and they're like, whoa, hold on, I'll do this. Because I think that I don't think they sometimes will fully understand how serious the things that I tell them that are valuable are until I'm like, it's gotten to be a problem that I don't think we should even work together anymore. So I kind of like start with gentle nudges into harsher and harsher pushes of what is valuable and what is not.
Eric, let's swing this back to you. That is so. Cliff, look at this master game, folks. He plays. He says, "It's not me, it's you." And then they're like, oh my God, wait. And then they just sign on. And then if you're a marketing whiz, you'd say, well, to keep me on board, my new pay rate, because this is now hazard pay, you're taking too much of my time, but you're too good of a human. I found that astounding though, Eric, and I saw you nod in agreement. And these are maybe some of the subtle things that people who have never done contest prep don't understand. And there's a reason why you spent 5 pages with Peter writing about this. Help the audience understand, Eric, where you estimated, Cliff, and I believe in your numbers for sure, Eric was nodding along, And I find that astounding. 93, I think you said, 97% of people that estimate, and the whole job of an athlete is, self-diagnostic, like, how's my training going, so on and so forth. So these are people that are probably making what they feel is a pretty informed choice, but being an experienced coach, you realize they're quite off the mark. And that's the vast majority. So Eric, what's going on there, or what have you observed? Just give us a little commentary on that, because I saw you nod emphatically as soon as Cliff said that.
No, it's 100% the same experience we've had at 3DMJ. Like, if you listen to our recent 3DMJ podcast, we typically have like a self-promotion commercial somewhere in the middle.
Yep.
And at the end and the beginning, like, hey, check out Mass. Hey, check out our books. Or, hey, we've got coaching coming up. And our coaching commercial is Andrea saying, hey, it is currently July 2023. If you're interested in competing in 2024, contact us ASAP, because the vast majority of competitors, especially first-time competitors, don't understand how long it takes to get in shape or what it's going to require for them to do that, and how much they need to lose and what that process looks like, and also setting them up in a position initially to be able to even have a shot at shows there, and developing the rapport and all the groundwork we need to shuttle you safely through that process and have the communication and resilience and skill set, and especially for first timers, just knowing what's coming to push you as far as is what's reasonable for your, rookie season conditioning. And that is something that we have, like, every time we create any contact point with potential clients, it is like the central message, because it is truly 9 out of 10, if not higher, people, especially first timers, but not always, which I'll talk about in a second, who get that wrong. And that is the reason for the lack of success. And for people who have had continual inability to get into shape and they're finally seeking out a coach, I would also say, even though they might have competed for 10 years, 9 out of 10 times that's the issue. The problem is maybe they come from a more old school background. They haven't been exposed to the same information sources. They go to the judges, and it is a real crapshoot when you talk to judges. Judges are very good at judging. They can accurately assess that you don't have the look you need. The what to do, or the why, or the therefore you should, that's not their area of expertise, unless they also happen to be a good coach. Most of the time, if you, especially because you feel like you dieted hard. Like I had an interaction with a gentleman back in 2009 who got judges' feedback, fortunately, that he needed to be leaner. And he was in the bathroom with me. He's like, I got dunked at the university. I was 5% body fat. And I know that essential body fat for men is like 5%. So how would I get leaner? I would die. And he literally said that. And and this is an M1 or M2 competitor who'd been competing a long time, but was still very interested in improving. So it wasn't a first timer by any means. And that, that was good feedback for him to get, because he had to struggle with that. He was playing with it in his mind. But I guarantee you, the last 10 times that competitor got judges' feedback, it was, oh, you need to maybe manipulate your water balance to bring out the definition, or maybe you need to try doing higher reps or different exercises because this muscle group didn't come in. Have you thought about the Stairmaster for your cardio? Or all these various things. And I think even sometimes judges don't understand, because people look like they're in shape on stage, but they don't necessarily know how much just low body fat overall is impacting that, especially when you are competing on the enhanced side and there's a lot more variables that are at play. And especially in an environment where there is generally this kind of, it's not as bad as it used to be, but 10 years ago, absolutely the emperor's new clothes. For those who are not aware, like the parable about the emperor who's literally wearing nothing, and he's convinced everyone around him that he has these great clothes, but they're just invisible. But no, he's got great clothes, even though I'm looking at a naked emperor, and the one person's like, yo, you're naked. And it kind of breaks the spell. I think that spell is only been broken recently, and the proof is in the pudding, in so much as if you went back 10 years, people were just as big, just as symmetrical, and just as impressive from a muscularity standpoint in natural bodybuilding. But now you will see first-timers, which is not always necessarily a good thing, who come in stage shape, and they are shredded. And that's because there are people who have this message, and there's the internet, and they can share it. So the conditioning standard the top-tier standard hasn't changed. Like if you wanted to be a pro champion in 2010, you still had to look the same way you do in 2020. But there are amateurs in 5th place who are coming in shredded now. And that just simply did not occur. Like, there was a good shot. Like, as long as you didn't have a bad physique, if you came in with striated glutes in 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, you would win a pro card, because that's like, you had these people competing year after year after year after year and not getting in shape, and they'd change their training split, or they'd change the quality of their protein or something like that. They would switch to fish 6 weeks out. They would, go keto, but not change their calories. They would do a lot of cardio, but then compensate somewhere else. And they didn't actually understand that they needed to get leaner, and then what levers to pull specifically to get leaner. And dieting longer than 12 to 16 weeks was you just don't do that. That's not a contest prep diet. That's too long because X, Y, and Z. So the principle, one of the rules you don't break was don't diet too long. That's a problem. All diets end at 16 weeks if it's a long diet. And you have to eat huge to get huge in the off season. And when that trickles into the natural bodybuilding community, where these 12 to 16 week diets are not coupled with 12 to 16 week dosing protocols, and that's the whole reason why they last that long in the first place. And eating huge to get huge means getting huge of adipose tissue, because you can't put on muscle that fast. And you're a seasoned competitor and you're competing every year. It's like, it's no surprise to me that once we finally kind of cross that threshold of understanding, all of a sudden now you see natural bodybuilding having a reputation of guys getting leaner than enhanced. So it is absolutely the biggest thing, is just making sure the time course is right. So I know that was a long way of just saying, yes, Cliff is right, but yes, Cliff is right.
Cliff, let me ask you this, man. For yourself, so you said that you have an analytical mind. For the 50% of people that weren't getting results, why did you not just tell them to train harder? Like, what is, but genuinely, what is the thought process for you as a coach? Like, how do you come up with the different choices that you make for these athletes? Can you give a little bit of insight into your decision-making process for just athletes in general?
Well, I mean, it's been a gradual process. I'm going to share a story that's like kind of embarrassing for me, but I'm going to do it anyway. A lot of things regarding efforts have come fairly natural to me in my life. My natural setting is, let's just go, and I don't know. And so I haven't, once again, not needing that permission. Early on in my coaching career, I was probably a good year and a half in. And I looked at my wife at the time and I said, why is everybody asking me if they're doing a good job? And she goes, are you telling them they're doing a good job? And I said, well, no, because they know what they're doing on a weekly basis better than I do. They would know more than I would if they're actually doing a good job. I don't know how closely they're actually seeing everything. It never even occurred to me that people would need to hear good job. I know that sounds wild. But I guess hearing those words was never something that I personally needed. So it didn't occur to me that other people would need it. And so, I guess I did a lot of studying. After the first year of coaching, I started to realize I needed to do a lot of research into psychology and why people make the choices that they do. Because I can't convince them convince them of the efficacy of my choices until I can weed through whatever mental block is preventing them from seeing it, right? A lot of people get into this sport, I would say, in maybe not the healthiest manner. Confidence issues, right? It's a lot of people get into the sport of, if I look better, people will like me. If I look better, I will have value. I'm going to get so big and so strong, nobody will ever hurt me again, And so I kind of have to, circumvent whatever that is, right? And then wrap that into this training protocol and try and hand over, right? and a perfect example, just as a small example, some people don't want to take rest days. You need rest days. I can't even tell you how often in my career you get people that I train 7 days a week. I don't need a rest day. Usually when I hear that it goes back to the therapy thing, right? They have kind of built this identity up that is, I'm the hardest worker in the room. Nobody works harder than me, that's their identity. And I kind of need to start breaking that identity down. And I'll ask them, I'll be like, I can tell you pride yourself on being the hardest worker in the room, but I'm going to tell you the hardest worker doesn't always win. The people that win are the ones that'll do whatever it takes to win. And what it takes is you need to rest and recover. You can be the hardest worker, but you're going to get beat by the guy that'll do whatever it takes. And what it takes is taking a few days off per week. So I kind of need to like speak to that. You know what I mean? I'm not a therapist, so I don't need to get into maybe why they have that. Will often recommend therapy to my clients, but I'm not going to get into why they need to be the hardest worker in the room, but I can maybe shift them to something that's a little more useful for our endeavor. I tried to like, the thing I found, the roadblock I was running into in my early coaching career is that I could present people with all of the scientific evidence or logic-based progression of thinking, right? Hey, I like to do this because of X, Y, Z. But I mean, well, a lot of the research also shows when you present people with facts that are counter to their current health beliefs, they almost just dig their heels in farther. So once again, I need to use those like psychological tactics to kind of circumvent whatever's causing them to dig their heels in. So I think that's kind of where, like, I guess I would say, like, for me, the magic of coaching comes in because you got to figure out what, and even when I lose a client, like a client, they quit or whatever, because it happens to everybody, I think a lot of coaches have this tendency to be like, well, they weren't ready, they weren't ready, they didn't have what it takes, which to some degree is true, right? They weren't ready now, but I guess I also say there's a role in my responsibility. Like if the client quits, I still failed because I didn't put the right string of words together to reach them. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know my diet and training programs are effective, right? But I need to also put the right string of words together to make them see the value in it, make them believe it is the right course. And, it's always like you're putting together a puzzle if I know what that right string of words is for each person.
Omar, this is exactly a moment where the key piece to why I think Cliff is really good is because he's able to really look at things in algorithmically, like, how do we get to success? And all right, protocol's good, training's good. I can see when I have good adherence that it works well. All right, I have not had success just telling people just to do it and repeating myself. What do I need to do to get them to eventually get there? Okay, I have to understand psychology. Okay, now that I understand the psychology, all right, how do I, so it is very much accurate, high sensitivity, continually checking associations between decision, action, and outcome, right? And I think it's sometimes easy to take this back to the whole evidence-based thing, to go, I don't need that because I have a meta-analysis. I'm at the top of the hierarchy, so I know if I get the meta-analysis on protein, carbohydrate, fat. Oh, there's not one on fat. Okay, I got the iron culture episode of Trex are talking about it, closest thing. We're good. Check last episode. And then I've got or 2 episodes ago, because I think we got Alex coming out next. And then I've got the meta-analysis on volume, intensity, and frequency. And I know that, deficit equals fat loss. If I don't make gains, do more. If I don't get leaner, cut harder. No other option is on the table. I can't logic my way through it. And I don't need to pay attention because I have the levers. And I think that is essentially cutting off both of the other table legs from evidence-based practice and just focusing only on that. And that's absolutely not Cliff. So that's the type of thing I'm talking about. Can we take a small diversion just to give some props to Cliff? I think it's been a while since you've been on, and because you spend so much time actually doing the work and coaching and being in the trenches, I think some people may not know the type of resume you have. And I know it's not always comfortable just to be like, hey, here's how I'm a badass. Could you share with us some of the levels of success you've had as a bodybuilding coach?
I've been coaching about 13 years now. Jeez, time flies, doesn't it?
I think we both started in 2010, right? Or 2011? You started?
2010, yeah. 2010. Time flies.
Same time as 3DMJ.
I know. I think I've had somewhere a little over 150 people turn pro in that time. I've had at least one world champion in natural bodybuilding in all divisions. I think a total of I think a total of 17 now, and a little over 100 pro titles. So yeah, so I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head, but those are the thresholds there.
I'm going to contextualize that a little bit. So 17 world champions is, I'm going to go ahead and venture forth that there is no other coach out there who can claim that. Because I want to say that across all of 3DMJ, and man, I shouldn't be saying this. This is not the way you market yourself, but across, if we go back to when I was a full-time coach, I think I've had pro winners, multiple pro winners in pro shows that weren't world champions. I have had medalists. I've had people who've gotten, silver at world championships. I have also had people who won amateur worlds, but pro world champions in every division and having a total of 17. That's an impressive number if you took 3 different good coaching companies and added them together. That's just me being objective and honest. Like this is obviously not something to drive. Like if you heard this segment and you're like, should I work with 3DMJ or Cliff Wilson? You know what you would choose. So this is me being honest.
Really appreciate that. I do. Omar, you said something that I guess I want to go back to one more time too. Is like, I actually, the way I view my own coaching process is, I like it because you actually kind of pace through the scientific method in a week by week, window. Is like, what I mean by that is, all right, every week I assess the situation of my client, the whole situation. They're stressed, they have or have not been following the diet. They have or have not been losing weight on the current caloric intake. They're either overtrained or feeling good or whatever. I take it all in. And then I form my hypothesis for what we need to get where we want by next week. And I prescribe for the week, and then they carry out the experiment, right? They put my hypothesis into action, and then I view the result at the end of the week, and then my conclusion gets rolled into my hypothesis for the following week. And it's just this repeating process. And I guess I take it really seriously in terms of like, how do I keep forming better and better hypotheses over the course of my career? I do end of the year audits for myself, and in terms of like what I think I did right, what I think I did wrong, and try to obviously do more of what I did right, less of what I did wrong. And then I also do, like, I always call them post-mortem checks of preps that I think went really well, that I think maybe were not. So, we all get those like golden clients, you know what I'm talking about? The people that are just easy. You give them the plan, they just go at it. I don't analyze those because that's the client. But there's times where you've had a difficult client, one reason or another, their body's difficult, or they've been difficult. But you're like, man, we still did great by the end of this. And I'll go through that. What did I say? What did I do? What did I do different in terms of the dietary changes that got things moving? At what point did things start moving well? Or the times where people quit, or I didn't get the result that I wanted, I go through, what could I have done differently? Was I not aggressive enough in the beginning of the prep? Was I too soft on them? Was I too hard on them? And I try to I make notes for myself every year, and I just try to get better at making a better hypothesis every week in terms of what people need. And it does get to the point where it's like, you've seen so many situations. You're like, man, I'd have seen this situation before. Last time I did this, it didn't work. Now I have a different approach. Let's try this.
Cliff,
I love it.
There are nuggets here, folks. And Eric, when you said, that's why I love hearing some of these stats where you rank them out. That is an absurd amount of wins. And this is something. This is a promo piece for Cliff. Then, what is very interesting, Cliff, I'll say this: it's the pendulum, the swings. Every decade or whatever in any space, the fitness space. I see amongst some of the most pivotal content creators of our time right now, 2023. them deciding to compete once again in bodybuilding. So I think for a while, a lot of interest was in powerlifting. There was phenomenal growth. I see that now being skewed back towards bodybuilding. But what is interesting to me is just how like you're doing the damn thing. You're like you have your champions, and there's this disconnect almost or disproportionate, let's say, amount of views or attention that someone can get as a coach. Not that it's only your wins that's the metric of evaluating yourself as a coach, but I'll phrase it this way. Shout out, like I saw, so Max Taylor, I've seen some of his content. I like his content. He decided to make a choice now to compete in bodybuilding. So he did a natural bodybuilding show. That's awesome, man. Jesse James. So there's another dude that decided to do his show. But there's some of the most like, so Jesse James will get like 1 million views per video, right? So a lot. Now, Max, it seems like it's a personal, almost philosophical journey, which is very interesting, of discovery, which I like. So he coached himself for his first prep. Anyways, a point of me saying that is that I find it so interesting that there's, like, Eric, where else can you find in the space? And again, it's not just about the wins, but you're an aspiring basketball player. It's like, oh, you want to get like Phil Jackson, like you want to hire Phil Jackson and like coach you to be a basketball player. You could do that, and it's what I find interesting in our space, and this is an observation. Then I have a question, Cliff. So it's just giving you a little bit of respect, man. Those in the know, like Eric's an OG. He knows all the. That's why he rattled off. He's like, yeah, that means it's 17, like a champ. Like he understands like how impressive that is. But it's interesting to me how something can get Eric more attention right now. So let's say natural, like there's some of these influencers, once again, it's almost like Matt Ogus all over, like 2012, Chris Jones, right? Like where some of the more pivotal voices are choosing to compete again. And not that they're not seeking out Cliff, but it's like, if there was someone, you choose a sport, I don't give a shit what it is. And it's like, and there's a guy or a group of people, there's Cliff, and then there's also other people that are doing the damn thing. It's like, I want to get really good at this. Like I'm a soccer player. It's like there's a soccer coach that like Messi, Ronaldo, like he's made them all phenomenal players. He or she, it's like, I'm gonna contact them. And they're like, fuck it. Like, nah, like I'm not interested in that. I think that's the fascinating part. And that's why I joked, Cliff, about therapy, about lifting. For a lot of people, it's like, are you interested in the end result? Like you want to be a powerlifter or like a bodybuilder? Or is it more like your own personal journey? And that is also perfectly valid. So just a side observation, but the question I had for you, speaking about the analytical mind, what role then does being an evidence-based practitioner make or mean in that general context of how you come with choices? Like why as a coach then, because there's a tons of different approaches, and I think it's probably tethered to the idea that you want to have the best possible outcome for your clients, and you understand that understanding those things is very important. But why is that partially, or at least a good portion of emphasis for you? So you're someone that's willing to experiment. You don't wait for permission, but you're also taking a look at what like the research shows. You're taking a look at practitioners, so like Helm, like whoever. Like, why is that something that's important to you then as a top tier coach?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, because it is. I think it really just comes from, I just want to be really good at what I'm doing. Like I mean, at the heart of it, I just want to develop my craft and continue to get better and better. And I kind of take the same approach, because in my own, I haven't competed in a while, but you just always want to be better. And the funny thing is, I like the Facebook like on this day thing. I like looking back at the competitors that I've had compete in the past and think, God, I do so much better with them now. Like I could really, done even better. And oftentimes I don't really consider myself competing against the other coaches out there. I'm just trying to be better than I was 4 years ago. And like I use the metrics of, how lean am I getting people? How much muscle am I retaining? Am I having more people finish? Like do they start this process and they finish the process? Things like that. And I mean, I'm kind of just like, I had to eat some crow a little bit earlier on in my career, because I was probably more on the side of, adhering to the research. I guess I would say like, I didn't venture out of the research as much early in my career, but there were a few times where clients, I was just seeing things that they would be doing, and I'd be like, it's like the correlation isn't always causation. But then when you start certain correlations, you're like, all right, I need to just take a closer look at this, you know? And I think I even mentioned one the last time we talked and spoke about peak week. And I was like, you know, I use an herbal diuretic sometimes for clients. And I was hell bent just to not use them. I was like, it doesn't make sense, you know? And I was like, going to explain my clients, like, I look leaner when I take them. And I was like, all right, you know, just take them and then show me some pictures. And I was like, well, damn, she's leaner. You know what I mean? Like, she looked better. And now it doesn't work that way for everybody, but, you know, there have been a couple of times where clients were like, hey, listen to me. You know, I think I have something that works here for me. And then I would just be like, all right, let's try it and see. And then I'll be damned, they were right, you know? And so I think like Eric said is like, sometimes I try to go with the research, right? You do this and it works. You understand the why and then why this would be the logical choice of what to do. But then other times when you're just in it and doing it, something works and you're like, whoa, I don't know why that works. Let's like deconstruct it and reverse engineer what we're looking at here. You know, maybe this works because, you know, X, Y, Z. And I'm not a researcher, so that's for people like Eric to figure out. Then after that, because you know, sometimes I think we even said that. I think we even said that when we were in Singapore. I was like, I mentioned something. I was like, I don't know really why it works. I was like, maybe you could tell me. So, but yeah, it's just informed choices. Not to like throw too many things in there, but another thing, a concept I've always kind of liked. It's kind of similar to the scientific method, but like in the army, they always, in military application, they always use like OODA loops, observe, orient, decide, and act. They kind of teach people in the military to make decisions in that manner. You observe your surroundings, you orient yourself, and then you decide and act. And the orientation, and when you look into the history of how the concept of OODA loops came into being, the orient was really like the pivotal stage, because we all have filters that we put things through. You know, the way a mathematician thinks is quite a bit different than the way a philosopher thinks. They kind of have a different way of looking at the world and different filters that they put incoming information through. And I guess for myself, I try to get as much information as I possibly can coming in. And then I try to get better at what filters I use and how I, you know, put this information together. And so I guess for myself, evidence-based means all evidence, what I am seeing in person, what I read in the research, and then it's upon me to organize it in some sort of usable manner and place some sort of hierarchy in what I feel to be the most valuable information at the time, and then I make my best decision.
I think that's that describes the process of me and how I became a better coach. And I think I started with not a very evidence-based approach and kind of just what things were people were doing. And then I would, you know, that changed as I got more educated. And then I did have that experience of putting science on a pedestal, and I actually got involved in science, better understood it. And I don't know if I went through a permission stage, at least not with myself, but maybe as a coach. But I think the biggest lesson for me is it's exactly that is, you know, evidence is things you find. It's not rules you follow. That's outcome based. And then trying to figure out what was the causational variable or variables or environment that led to it. And even if you can't figure out what was the key variable or variables, you still have to acknowledge the fact that it happened. And then being willing to actually play those cards again, even with a bit of ignorance behind it, saying, I don't know exactly why this works, but it does repeatedly. Probably the biggest example of this in our practice was the success we started having with diet breaks. And we just kept repeatedly seeing them, and I could not justify it based on the research and at least what we thought we were happening. I still sort of can't physiologically, although we still don't have it on, like, you know, dieting bodybuilders 8 weeks out with half striated glutes or whatever. But it is starting to make sense. You know, like, Cliff, you and I know that the difference between someone getting to good conditioning and elite conditioning, assuming relatively average genetics, is preserving sufficient willpower and probably even some physiological fatigue, not being too fatigued, so that you can then push yourself to an uncomfortable place for long enough, right? And I think previously, before you had better understandings or models of prep or dieted for short periods, it was just, okay, who can grind themselves into dust the most and have the least amount of muscle loss and consequences to the way they looked? So it would favor people with lower set points, favor people who are naturally better at working hard, and just more resilient. And that's fine. And those people are still going to get there easier, even with better methods. But me understanding that diet breaks weren't doing something magical with RMR, magical with NEAT, magical with glycogen, or any of these things, but actually the data showing, oh, it enhances satiety, it makes them feel subjectively better, and they find the whole process sticking to the diet is easier. That makes sense now. Like, okay, even if it is just a net deficit in the end that creates fat loss, but if I can get them to the same point and they feel like they've got another gear versus like they're going to fall across the finish line, because the finish line isn't there yet, dude. Like, hey, you're in good shape. If we want to compete at a high level as a pro, the finish line that we had that got you your pro card, now we have another 6 weeks of dieting. So are you good? And with diet breaks more often, they're like, yeah, coach, I'm good. So I think that was a realization that we've only had if we stuck to the research only in the last 2 years, 3 years. But we were using diet breaks in 2014. We were using refeeds and diet breaks in 2013, 2014 successfully. So we did that for 6 years without me being able to sit there as, the meme of Eric Helms, Captain Science Guy, explaining why. And you can find on record me explaining for the wrong reasons why I think diet breaks worked, in 2015 or 2016. But ultimately, like Dan John says, if it works, you're right. And to some degree, that is true. And at the limits of where the science kind of peg of the three-legged stool of evidence-based practice is, you have to be willing to do that. And I think that was one of the big lessons for me to being like a not so great coach early on, to a science limited coach, to then when I was probably becoming a good coach in 2013, 2014, was just me being willing to follow the evidence and not restricting what evidence is, just like you said.
No, and something super similar to that too. And like, I still kind of say this, like, I have certain limits on how fast I want someone to lose in order to get them lean. And it's like, for the preservation of muscle tissue, right? But then sometimes people will say, well, we're short on time. What if we just lose faster? I'll lose a little bit of muscle tissue, but we can come in just as lean. Experience tells me you cannot come in as lean if you rush it. It's like, it does make sense logically to think, if I just lose faster, eventually if I just keep losing, I will get as lean, even if I'm losing faster. It just doesn't work that way. I've questioned, is it just like inflammation buildup, or there's some filminess that occurs? I don't really know what's going on. My experience has shown me over and over again, you can't rush it. You just can't do it. I don't know,
Yeah, you just look worse.
Yeah, and I don't really know what it is. You can't just be smaller and be as lean. It just doesn't work that way. And it's, and it's interesting. I do have to give like a shout out to my dad, because my dad is as far as like not needing the permission and also just like how to go about things. My dad's a PhD plant pathologist. Not in the sphere, but I remember early on, when in my coaching career, my bodybuilding career, he just he told me a story one time about how he went to this scientific conference, and this guy who I believe he had his bachelor's in business, but he worked at some seed company but he'd been in the field, for a while, literal field, and being plant pathology. And he gave a presentation about methods he had found effective over the years. And he said he had generalized ideas for why this may be working, and my dad said that he blew everybody away in the audience. He said this guy who has no formal training in, the science of plant pathology blew everybody away in the audience with some of the ideas he put forth. And he said that guy's ideas, he said everybody in the audience wanted to go out and test some of these ideas and figure out why, why were these things working, and see if his general ideas were the reasons, right? And he said that that guy ended up being one of the people that kind of changed the way plant pathology was done. And I just kind of remember early on, I was like, that sounds good with me. Like I want to just find what works, and I don't need to be the guy that figures out the exact reason why. I just want to figure out what works. And I think we even had that discussion too when we last saw each other. It is like, I think that it's really interesting. You can choose such a niche, and what your role will be within the industry, and it's like, for me, it was, I just want to find what works. And yeah, I sometimes want to produce that generalized idea, or maybe why for my own better information or to inform my future choices. But, science has, the testing of science has limits, and it's always progressing. So it's like, it's not always that, science is wrong. It's just incomplete, right? It's forever incomplete, and it just gets more complete as time goes on. So it's like we just get better picture as we go.
Yeah, good applied, I think, excellent framing. And to me, good applied science is like running a relay race, like track meet, 4x1, 4x4. And every other person is practice and every other person is science, and the race never stops. And I think people are thinking more about like, nah, get that science guy out of the anchor spot. Like, I'm gonna run an 800. You'll get slower, because you can't do anything more than what you have already done. And like you said, there are limits to science. So it has to be this continual handshake pass off. And what I mean by that explicitly is that once in practice they've established this works, the handoff is then to go, but why? Right? Because when we've established what works, it's also existing in a sphere where there's this, as we talked about earlier, loud voices, prominent people, dogma. And it's easy to look back and be like, yeah, Ronnie Coleman knew about length and partials long before you did. No, he didn't. He knew that worked. And that is valuable. But there was a lot of other people who were like, well, I feel a better pump when I do the top of a lateral raise, or when I just do the end partial, or just do the top port of my hamstring curl, or I actually like to lift heavier, so I'm only going to do a quarter squat and not touch the bottom. And, so you have ego in there, or maybe they're really, really good at talking, or they're just a genetic outlier. We were talking, Omar, you mentioned that earlier. You mentioned Matt Ogus. So Matt Ogus, at the time he popped up, and there's equivalents to this in a bunch of different siloed sectors now, he did very well. I coached him, and it created a perception that I was an amazing coach. I think Matt Ogus would have done really well with almost anybody. We worked well together. It was great. And there was a perception that he was like the best because he was prominent and he had an excellent physique. But in 2013, he lost two of our clients in the mayhem for the overall. So he is a very, very good natural bodybuilder. He is not the best, but the disproportionate amount of attention he got led us to us having a 300-person waiting list in 2012. And that's not an exaggeration. It completely changed the way 3DMJ had to operate. We had to create off-season coaching, Skype protocols. We had to figure like, oh my God, like it's a great problem to have. And I am truly not exaggerating. That's 100% true. And there are things like that happening now that cloud our ability. So for every one Ronnie Coleman, there's 100 other voices doing different things. So there's not a collective understanding that this anecdote is actually what works. That only happens for pretty clear things that work for everybody. So when there is maybe 10 different things that could work, that's when you pass the baton to science, tests all 10 of them. This happens in the supplement industry all the time. And it's like, yep, unfortunately, still just creatine and caffeine, right? Or another example is like length and partials. Okay, there were some rumblings, there's some thoughts, there were some anecdotes, but absolutely wasn't something that everybody was doing. And I don't want to take away credit from people like Cass or even Ronnie Coleman who were thinking about this and didn't have the research to back them. Absolutely innovative, great, fantastic. But it is only now that it has been tested and we're understanding specifically what part of the range of motion and having not even a mechanistic understanding, but just an applied isolation of what is occurring there that's leading to growth. And then now the baton goes back to a practitioner. Okay, hey, it's being in the lengthened position and spending more of your effort there. Okay, well, let me play with that idea in the trenches and see how it works best when I have it with clients. Should I be using cables? All right, where should I set the cable? Should I be using a Smith machine or a leg press? Does this work well with free weights? Which ones? okay, the lateral raise, do I just do cable, or maybe I can do a lying Serge Nubret-esque style lateral raise? Like, all of that is the baton going back to the trenches, right? And this is a continual iterative process.
Well, and you bring it up, and it kind of actually ties back to what Omar was saying. You were saying like how I hardly ever get the people that are really popular approaching me for prep. Um, I think the one exception would be like Doug Miller. And you know that's the only person that was like really popular that reached out to me to do a prep together. I think one thing that does get so convoluted in the anecdotal evidence sphere is how what sort of personality are the people claiming the anecdotal evidence? Um, I think one of the reasons I tend to not ping on people's radars, I've been told I'm a decent speaker, but I don't engage in a lot of hyperbole. I don't make grandiose statements. And I kind of tend to have a really, analytical way of speaking. And so I think that it's not going to just attract the masses when I'm like, yeah, this might work pretty well for you. Doesn't sound super sexy. And so then you get in this sphere where you get people that will engage in hyperbole, make really solid absolute, make and claim really solid absolutes, and it just draws people in. It's that real quick fix type stuff, and it is hard. It's hard for the analytical people that are really good to find that middle ground because you do need to attract people. So I've been like mentoring some young coaches, and I have this one younger. I won't say his name to embarrass him because he's an acquired guy, but he's a very intelligent. He's a younger guy. He's like 23, really intelligent, really thoughtful. He puts a lot of thought behind everything he does and says. And I know this too because he's a client of mine. And I'm just going to say he's also a beast. Like he's probably, I'm not exaggerating, one of the most muscular 23-year-old natural competitors I've ever seen. And anyway, I held a camp at my house, and he came to my house, and he was telling me I was having a hard time working at, getting new clients and stuff like that, even though he knows his stuff. Then we go and work out, and he's like training in long sleeves and this, and I'm like, cut the sleeves off your shirt. You're gonna have clients it's like you don't need to solely play that game. He's like, I don't want to play that game. And I'm like, but you have stuff to back it up. You got to use the tools that you have. If you're a good speaker, you have to develop. I told him I was like, you have the knowledge. Like you're qualified to be a coach at this point. He's put in a lot of work to improve himself. And I'm like, you need to use what tools you can to get people in front of you. Use your ridiculous physique to get people in front of you, and then you're educated. Find a way to speak to them in a charismatic and interesting manner, and you can do so without, being immoral and saying things that aren't true or whatever. I was like, just use what gifts you have to get people in front of you, and then, say something interesting and helpful, and, but it is problematic because the people that are oftentimes claiming these anecdotal evidence, they'll claim it for significant personal gain without actually caring if it, helps the testosterone stuff, supplement companies. I think a lot of times it's dangerous too when I see people making their entire living off of, if you make your entire living off of like one thing, my entire living comes off of this supplement, or my entire living comes off of this training program that touts only one way of training, then the problem is you have a vested interest in, shoving aside any evidence to the contrary, because now your livelihood is at stake because, you've been touting the complete opposite. It's just a dangerous game, I think.
And I think it even happens from ego as well. Like there's an interesting thing in a lot of the kind of science-esque spaces where, bold claims, good physique, but still kind of science adjacent and willing to have hyperbole and be like, this is it. Like I've figured it out. And a lot of it is you want to be the smartest person in the room. But then once you've planted that flag, it looks bad, especially to the audience you've cultivated based upon this very ego-driven kind of self-gratifying, cult of personality person. Once you planted a flag, it is the reputational equivalent of having the same thing you just described all of your vested interests financially into one book or a supplement. But now it's actually your image, you know? So you get the same thing even when there's not necessarily a financial backing. You'll find someone who, and you can see them, like, there's some of the very, very popular people, I'm going to say very comfortably, quote unquote, evidence-based people, because they are very willing to shatter the principle of charity. They're very willing to use ad hominem attacks and be condescending and defend a position rather than look to evidence to back it. And then that flag's just getting dug deeper and deeper into the ground. And it's all about, hey, I'm the right person. I've never been wrong. I'm the smartest person in the room. And because you will have to be wrong eventually, because science and everything we know is limited for all the reasons we talked about, you're inherently not evidence-based, and you're forcing yourself to be able to not change that opinion, or for it to be very difficult or even harmful, at least to your perception of your business, to do so. So you get that even when there's not financial incentives. So it's an interesting thing, and it's a funny thing that's at stake. So yeah, I see it all the time, and the one thing I do know, those people don't last. They eventually isolate themselves or get on an island, and they only have true people who are buying into the cult of personality who stick with them, because they eventually close more and more doors of awareness and observation, and their algorithm, like we were talking about earlier, gets worse over time.
Cliff, you've been dropping straight fire now for over an hour. We are cognizant of the man's time. I will say, yeah, one of my personal pet peeves a little bit, Eric, to your point, is I guess what you'd call like retrospective framing, where people will take a look, to your point, where you said like lengthened partials, like Ronnie Coleman, where something will come out. Then you'll find the person with the anecdote from back in the day to confirm, as like they knew it all along. The bro, like, they knew it all along. I'm like, no, if you were to poll in 1995, 500 bodybuilders, and you ask them a wide variety of questions, hey, do you think, basically, you explain what length and partials are superior, whatever, for building muscle? It's like, you get 5% or whatever. It's like they're acting like this was the known, it was this known quantity, and they just, someone like marketers obfuscated it. They knew all the time. And so I just find it always, I have nothing but respect for the practitioners such as yourself, Cliff. They're very analytical, so they can synthesize their own personal experience, the experience of their clients, and so on and so forth, with what the body evidence shows, package it in a way that's understandable to a wide variety of different clients with different, psychological profiles. And then perhaps most importantly, get the damn results and get them yucky. I did feel bad. I want to jump back to you, but when Eric said, he coached X amount of people, what he didn't mention, I could have been the first world champ. But when I approached him, I said, I think I'm 4 weeks out. And he said, you're about a year and 4 weeks out. And that it soured me the wrong way, because he didn't know, Cliff, how willing I was to go, like how low in my calories. And I knew if I just grinded it out, I would have just trimmed the fat. But no, man, I want to throw it back to you. I'm aware of your time. Is there anything you want to say in closing, or anything you want to kind of, a new area even you want to explore? The floor is yours, my friend.
No, I really appreciate you guys having me on, because, I don't know. It's like, after being in the sport for so long, you watch so many trends over the course of fitness and bodybuilding. And it's interesting. You just start to see things come back around now, especially after 13 years. And I'm like, man, we've been here before. Come on. Like, it does, it is difficult to always try to get people to embrace nuance, and embrace change. But I do think that, I guess my approach has always been, I think the more quality people we have out there doing that, like kind of saying like, just getting rid of these like binary ways of thinking, then the more we can probably push things forward. Because like Eric said, the overall competitiveness of the sport is way better. Like, you do have people taking 5th place at amateur shows that are just, looking amazing. I would say the top to bottom of the sport is better than it's ever been, regardless of like the total numbers that you're seeing at shows. And I think it can only continue to get better over the course of time as we kind of keep getting that message out there.
Well said. And I just want to say I really appreciate your time, your perspective, Cliff. I think your focus on just being a better version of yourself and getting your clients results There's an element of purity to where I think you are able to step around a lot of biases, which other coaches don't, because you're primarily competing with yourself and trying to push your clients to be the best version of them rather than trying to be the best in the room or perceived as the best in the room or better than other coaches. Omar, we're going to have some kind of dope title for this, like the mind of a great bodybuilding coach or something. I don't know. That's not it, but something.
Yeah, you know what's really funny about what you just said too is I tell my client this every year. At the end of every year, it's funny. It's for business. You do list like the pro cards you've won and the world championships and stuff like that. But one thing I always reiterate to my clients every single year, I tell them, winning isn't what we do; it's just the nice side effect of what we do. And I tell them like that's kind of like the approach that we try to take is. It's really now what we're focused on. That self-improvement aspect is just everything. And then victories just kind of happen to come along with that.
Just hundreds.
Especially important viewpoint in bodybuilding. Especially. It's not just the highest total, is it? It's a little more subjective.
Woo! Just hundreds and hundreds of wins, No, we're going to make sure, Cliff, that we have Kai link all the relevant links in the description for people to check out. And my one request would be when we have you back on down the road for a third appearance, it's got to be a polo. Maybe it'll be the trifecta. Okay, for the first time ever.
I'll let you choose the color.
Look at this guy. I mean, I got to find the only problem for me. I'm going to go polo. I'm going to have to keep it open. I got this thick ass neck that gives me some sleep apnea, which it sounds cool till it's not. But we'll be all styling and profiling, best believe.
I'll wear a tux.
Oh, damn.
There we go.
Yeah. And Eric and myself will wear the tux t-shirt. You know what I'm saying? So it's like a
yes.
That's
absolutely.
But no, thank you so much, man. Thank you for everyone for listening to another episode of Iron Culture. You could go ahead and leave a rating and review. Speaking about accolades and so on and so forth, we've been called by many pundits the best fitness podcast. I just made that up, but I'm sure if you look at some dark corner of the space, someone had to have said it at least once or twice, maybe even thrice. People leave ratings and reviews on iTunes. Typically, they'll give 5 stars. We'll leave it to your own discretion. What you want to give, we do tend to read them, so we appreciate everyone for the feedback, and we'll catch you in that next episode. Insert date here from now until the end of time. Until next time.